Hi everyone. My name is Paul Caruso. I'm with American University's School of International Service, and this is a proposal for a project that I'm working on. The name of which is Constitutional Constructs, where powers derive weaker strong courts. And the title was created from a need to express mainly two things: that we are talking under the umbrella of constitutions, and that we are talking about constructing courts here. So let's get right into it, into the conversation around this topic. So most scholars are talking about two things. First, the independence of courts, and second, the measuring how strong a court is. The general assumption by scholars right now is that independence is indicative of a better form of judiciary or even a stronger judiciary, but this is not necessarily the case. While they're certainly influencing each other, they're not necessary for each other's existence. There's other scholars that talk about the measuring of a court, and this is very useful to the field, but it doesn't address what I'm trying to investigate here. But I will incorporate it into my research to assist me in measuring some of the concepts that I'll be talking about. And then recently, I'm talking about some buzz in the United Kingdom. Recently, there was a case called R on behalf of Miller versus the Prime Minister on September 24th of 2019. And this basically was the new Supreme Court, which was founded in 2009, telling the Prime Minister that he was wrong. And the Prime Minister argued that the Supreme Court didn't have the jurisdiction. Why wasn't that figured out in all of the years that the UK Supreme Court and the judiciary, which is one of the oldest in the world, why wasn't that figured out before? So that is the basis of my question. So I'm proposing to research the historical and contemporary actualizations of the UK Supreme Court, the Japanese Supreme Court, the French Court of Cassation, and the German Federal Constitutional Court, because I want to answer what explains the reasons for which strong and particularly weak constitutional judiciaries are formed in democratic regimes through study of how different variables can lead to weak courts. And my question is, why are some constitutional courts in democracies made to be weaker than others? There's a few schools of thought here. First, we have my answer, which is fear. This school of thought assigns fear as a driving factor here. It argues that the more fear of a stronger court that is present, the weaker its founders are going to make that court. So the more fear one has over strong courts, the weaker they're going to make their product. The first alternative to this is the ability to force and legitimacy. This is a school of thought that argues that preconceived ideas by the court's founders on whether the court would be able to enforce its rulings or not would influence the power that it has. So, for example, if the citizens of a nation are not going to listen to the rulings of a strong court because of cultural influences, the founders are going to make it weaker for that reason. Our second alternative is the practicality of a court's strength. Basically refers to founders of courts believing that if, for example, if you make a weaker court, it does actually a better job than a stronger court, and that would be the reason why it would be weaker or stronger. So this is going to be conducted with a small n methodological approach for a few reasons. First, it is close enough to large n that it contains clearly defined variables and multiple cases. This offers internal validity and a comparative structure that allows me to show some sort of trend across multiple environments and cultures. It's also close enough to interpretivist that I can take time to focus on each case individually and in depth, focusing on discourses, but not necessarily doing a discourse analysis, more just talking about dialogues that are happening, because we are talking about kind of attitudes towards courts here. I am studying the environments of these courts for that reason, and so small n accommodates multiple interests at once. These are my variables. So first we have the dependent variable of strength of the court, particularly with a focus on weak courts. It will be measured using a categorical variable of either weak or strong, using metrics in that form of scholarship I mentioned before. My independent variable is going to be fear on a sliding scale of intensity. It will be an ordinal variable with the following levels. First, fear not being present, fear somewhat present, fear clearly present, and fear being the main consideration in deciding the strength of the court. And it will be operationalized through a series of questions asked of each case, such as, was the rhetoric and logical analysis by the founders reflective of hesitation or fear as driving factors? I'll be controlling that these cases remain in democracies with verifiable democratic institutions and values. My other two variables are the alternative independent variables from those other schools of thought. The independent variable of practicality would either be a yes or no categorical variable, and ability to enforce and legitimacy would be categorical as well, with either able or unable. And just another term to consider, constitutional courts, they're defined as courts that deal directly and deliberately with the constitutional rules and regulations within a state. This does not mean a Supreme Court necessarily, but it can. My hypothesis is real simple. The greater presence of fear leads to the creation of a weaker court. My case selection is going to have 4 cases. So first, the United Kingdom Supreme Court has been included because of its recent run-ins with other branches of government, and is actually going to, because of its 2019 ruling in Miller versus the Prime Minister, is potentially facing court-curbing measures, which is a huge topic within my research. And it is the most recently developed out of 4. And so primary sourcing and documents would be more readily available. Second, the German Federal Constitutional Court shows the differentiation in the dependent variable when the independent variable changes. This is because Germany lacked fear coming out of World War II, because its courts were historically, during World War II, used by political actors, and they were weaker and they couldn't really do anything to stop them. They are built stronger now because of that lack of fear, to try and prevent majority or minority rule. The French Court of Cassation is the third variable. It's the exact opposite of the German Federal Court, because the French fear strong courts after the kangaroo courts that existed during the French Revolution. And the Japanese Supreme Court offers a bit of diversity in it, because it comes from the other side of the globe, and is often said to be based on the United States Supreme Court, but is noticeably weaker. And that's pretty much agreed upon between scholars. The only debate that exists in that is whether or not it's better or worse that it is weaker. So yeah, let's get into our data. So from each of these cases, I'll be looking at archives and primary source documents and conversations. This is inspired by my SIS 306 section, which focuses on primary sources and archives. While this is initially daunting because it seems like a heavy task to take on, I've realized it's for the best. Primary sources and archives are the closest representations of what the feelings and thoughts of the actors I am studying were. I'm doing an historical analysis of the attitudes to predict what founders of courts and democratic nations will do in the future when certain variables are present. In order to do this, I have to hear from the actors themselves. This manifests itself in newspaper reports, diaries, books written by actors, reports of things said in private, public remarks, declassified information, including conversations, general published work by those in the conversation at the time, etc. These are official and scholarly sources, or even popular sources if they have enough influence on the court itself. And a lot of the critiques on Smallin are going to be that these sources are biased, but that's actually exactly what I'm looking for. I want to know what the subjective and charged opinions are of these actors, so I believe it actually works in my favor here. So evaluation. So I'm going to be evaluating this analysis through process tracing and holistic consideration here. Process tracing is the series of steps one goes through to look at the historical context and order of events to determine the independent variable that created the dependent variable. And scholars generally commend this method of an holistic approach that I'll be adopting because it provides an overall narrative rather than just a start and stop that other methodology would prefer. I'm going to be taking the results of these methods and determining which independent variable is the true cause of differentiation, and then trying to draw conclusions and draw trends to predict how courts will be formed in the future. And it's important to mention the causal model here. So the independent variable, causal mechanism, and the dependent variable exist in chronological order and do not cause each other. Fear, the independent variable, exists among policymakers for any X reason in the context of court power. Then you introduce the constant among all the independent variables, which is the opportunity to influence the system. In order for the independent variable to even matter or to for it to have any bearing on the dependent variable, which is reports, you have to be able to influence the formational process. Um, and so that manifests itself in multiple ways, but the entire formula results in the reports, and you can see our, this is over the metric of time. And that's pretty much it. This research adds to the conversation by beginning the conversation over trying to create likelihoods, how courts in the future will be formed in relation to their power. It fills that hole we saw at the beginning, that current scholarship wouldn't touch. This only touches on courts domestically, but it sets the stage for the research in international courts. It also gives a warrant for other types of research using other methodologies as well. One challenge with this is obviously trying to find cases that offer diversity while not comparing cases that are so unlike each other. It's a careful balance, but also additionally, I haven't yet looked into the availability of documents and archives for each of the cases, but that is a subject for my 306 section to explore. And I would love help with a couple of areas I've struggled with, that being my control variables and my causal model. These are things I've struggled with in the past, and I've made improvements on, but I would love additional support to make sure that these are all truly made secure. So thanks so much for paying attention and for being a part of this this conversation with me, and I look forward to conducting this research from spring of 2020.